essential question or a compelling statement, and conceptual in nature, and something that spans the narrative of the learning. So that statement or question is something that shows us that the learning arc, if you will, across the span of time in which the learning wall is capturing evidence towards that learning story. Number two, I suggested that it adopts the inquiry cycle. So whether we are looking at Kath Murdoch's inquiry cycle or our BDEC inquiry cycle, we want to see a learning wall designed towards these phases of learning, these phases of inquiry. We showed you a couple that did just that. We showed you one that adopted this cycle of inquiry and one that used the BDEC cycle of inquiry. Three, we wanted to document evidence, and some of it should be student-centered evidence, as in student-chosen evidence, and some would be teacher-selected or teacher-structured and assigned evidence that would go up on that learning wall. Fourth, and I'll just mute, make sure everyone's muted. Fourth, I'll go back, forgive me. Oh, I'm bouncing around here. Let's go back, Trevor. Let's go back. There we go. Fourth, the learning wall should foster some agency. It should provide equity and opportunity for students to come to the learning wall and talk about their learning, make connections across the learning, ask questions about the learning, and reflect about themselves across the learning narrative. Where were they? Where are they now? And what are the things on the learning wall that reflect that growth, that reflect that experience? And then last, what a great place for us to engage in equitable assessment practices with our scholars. If we can see the learning wall as not just a place where we put the pretty samples of learning, the display of learning. The learning wall truly is the formative evidence, the formative experiences. If I have a summative in mind, the learning wall allows us to look at the evidence there as formative steps towards the summative. So I wanted to start by just grounding us in those 5 characteristics for you to consider as you do your show and share, as you tell us a little bit about where you are in this journey. You can refer to these 5. And in fact, before I open up the floor, why don't I just ask you to have a look at these 5 now? And thinking of your learning wall, what have you engaged in? What have you created? Because if we talk about a learning wall spanning time, well, how much time have you engaged in a learning wall, and where are you in this process? Which of these 5 can you speak to? As I slow right down, give you a moment to reflect. And what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen. And so if you need any of these learning walls, I know you have the PDF version of these slides. Further, you could take a photo of this slide to reflect on it. So when you do your show and share, you've got a little bit of scaffolding into your sharing, into your talk. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. I'll come back to the main room. And I'll kindly open up the floor. Who would like to begin? Who tried on a learning wall?
Do you guys meet with Erica yet? Oh, did you meet with Erica? Is that you meet with Erica now?
No, this is the inquiry.
We can hear
network.
you. You're not muted, and I can't mute you. There we go. I don't know what room that was. Do you know what room that is, Erica?
Yeah, that's Fort McPherson.
Fort Mac. We can hear you. Fort McPherson. We can hear you. Thanks for muting. Erica, I appreciate you throwing that in the chat. Learning Wall supports Jess Vance on Instagram.
I meant to write at Jess Vance, but I was distracted.
Yeah.
We're trying a new room here for I can't even talk. It's Monday.
We can hear you.
Okay, you guys hear us. Good. We've all tried some learning walls. Jim, do you want to go first? Erica, is there any way for? Oh yes, I can share our screen. Okay, awesome. I'm going to click that if that's cool with you guys.
Totally.
Yeah.
This is exciting.
Let's see. We'll share. Okay. So I've got. I think last time hopefully everybody can see this. Last time we were talking, for my own learning wall, I discussed how it kind of was a little bit of a failure. It didn't have, you know, the effects that I had hoped for. So I do kind of a graffiti style. I put up chalk paper. Let's see if it loads. I hope, there we go. So this was my first attempt at a learning wall. So I called it the knowledge wall, and I approached it from a graffiti perspective for the kids. And I said, you know what, whenever you feel welcome, like that you've learned something important or something that you think, knowledge that you think should be, you know, retained or passed on to others, let's add it to the knowledge wall. And, you know, there was a couple things that worked well. We talked about being strong like two people, and what else? We talked about like cyberbullying and health and stuff. They've also included some math, but then there was a lot of just random things that were put up here. I don't even know what this is. Yeah, somebody must be in love here, you know, and somebody really likes video games. So you know, as this was going, and I was like, gosh, this isn't having the effect that I wanted to. I tried adding my own stuff, like the QFT process, but it still wasn't clicking in for the kids. So we started a new unit on hip hop and rap and poetry. And this time I'm trying to do the graffiti wall in a much more focused kind of layout. So I've added up at the top here what our kind of guiding our essential questions are. So we're talking about, is rap poetry? And then we were able to come up with, you know, comparison of rap versus poetry. And I added that to the board. And then I'm gonna, so, you know, the second question here, sorry, what literary devices do rappers use? So we're going through alliteration, go through illusions and all of that sort of stuff. And as we go through it, we'll add it up to the board. So it is a little bit more myself focused, like teacher focused, and I'm kind of dictating what's going this time. However, I'm hoping in a third attempt that them seeing me modeling this, that they'll be able to kind of put a little bit more of their own personal flair and touches onto it.
Super cool. Super cool. I'm curious, what's for this particular unit, this rap and poetry unit, and I love the overarching question there, is rap poetry. Although that, you know, we can easily say yes, no, that has some depth to it, doesn't it? You know, we really have to get into some analysis, some perspective, and some digging into, you know, poetry and rap to compare and contrast. But I'm curious, for this particular unit, what's your summative intent? What's the assessment intent towards the end of this unit?
That's a good question. So we're actually doing a lot of analysis. We're looking at some more famous rap, but we're kind of doing it through the time. So we started with, gosh, what was it? I can't even remember now. Now that I'm on the spot, I'm like, I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous. Safe place. Safe place.
There is kind of a more traditional style assessment. They will do a classic kind of written test assessment to classic devices, but then they're also going to be designing their own hip hop and rap songs. Whether they choose that to beats, that's up to them, or they can just keep it simple and just do pen to paper. They have to use them on devices. So the actual assessments are fairly straightforward, practical, but we are trying to approach it, I think, from a little bit more of an inquiry-based perspective. We are, as kind of a supplementary, we're kind of doing cross-curricular to it. And so these are kind of the starts. We're going to look at graffiti as an art. What's its intent? You know, is it vandalism or is it art? That sort of stuff. And when can you classify graffiti as art, and when is it classified as vandalism? This is just the beginning, but I'm hoping to, you know, add a little bit of a kind of artistic flair to the unit as well. I don't know if that answers your.
Yeah, no, it definitely sheds light on my question, and I think, and I asked because I think that's something you could add to your learning wall over time, is evidence of their attempts towards whatever the summative is. So you mentioned a bit of a rap analysis, right? Or maybe even they're going to generate their own lyrics or their own, you know, rap themselves as poetry. It would be really neat to show some samples on that learning wall across time, so that those students can go up and look at these different samples, compare, contrast, share ideas. And that's structuring the formative towards the assessment intent, right? Whatever the target is towards the end,
Yeah.
can the learning wall chop that up a bit in terms of experiences and lessons, and then of course evidence towards the learning wall. That would be really neat to see you add that. And I know you are limited to real estate, so I'll show you some examples from my classroom as well, where with limited real estate, I'm kind of getting creative in terms of how I'm adding on a little bit of space for that student generated evidence. So yeah, like this particular piece, that would be the second attempt. Adding some of those formative evidence to that piece would be great.
I can do that. I've got no problems going up on the corners above, below and to the sides here. So yeah, that's cool. I like it. I like messy. I like my room's pretty eclectic, so that fits in with my philosophies.
Yeah, messy, eclectic. Yeah, that rings true when I think of you. Eclectic, absolutely. And yeah, friends, that would be a little bit, pulling back from this example. And one of the characteristics towards assessment, we want to see that structured formative across the learning plan, right? So whatever our intent is, whatever our summative, whatever the target is, can we backwards design towards the provocation? If the provocation, the first one, is the start of the unit, what are some formative steps that we're going to plan to get our students ready for that summative intent? There's some more examples here.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, now that I'm done, Melanie if we've got time, Melanie's got some examples
Yeah.
as well from her classroom.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Appreciate you. Melanie.
This might be, I guess, more of like, I don't know if it's like a basic or super great example. We did we were looking at nonfiction text features. So I had a bunch of photocopied just from like different books that we had in the classroom. So they got to like cut them out and just kind of put them into this chart so that they can see clear examples of what they were. And they just kind of clearly it's like very messy in some areas, and we probably should have made a bigger chart in certain areas. Like here, they're kind of overlapping because they ran out of space. So I may have to kind of get them to redo this and just have it more open so that they can it's a little bit more clear. And then we had done, this is an example, so a lot of times they use more for ELA. A lot of times they use the same kind of words like happy and sad and mad, and I got them to use sticky notes to do different examples of how we could show that emotion instead of just saying I'm happy or I'm mad kind of thing. Angry and surprised, and yeah, I guess just shocked face, and just kind of talking about even their body language and stuff. I don't know, again, not super in depth compared to some of the better learning polls that I've seen. And I wanted to show this example because I feel I guess in the sense of how Daniel was saying how his didn't work out the way he wanted to at the beginning. This was kind of this wall for me. I had seen, it was actually on a random teacher blog page or something, and it seemed like a great idea. And it was basically the teacher had done, instead of them posting words on the word wall, she had the paper out like this, where she had all the letters of the alphabet, and as students had trouble spelling certain words, she would obviously kind of go through that word with them kind of thing, and then have them write it on the wall. And then if another student had trouble with that same word, then they could do the teaching, they could help that student themselves, so how they kind of got to learn. But it didn't super work out the way I wanted it, and honestly, probably partly my fault, because I feel I forget half the times. And the random occasion when there's a student that's oh, can I write this on the word wall? Yes, please, please write it up, just so we can kind of add to it. But I think that I'm gonna start a sound wall in the class, and just because I know there's quite a few of them, at least in one of my classes, that have a lot of they struggle a lot with spelling, and just kind of going through the basics, different how certain sounds are not just one word, For example, like the A sound, like it could be like an A or AY, but it can also be like EA, an EI kind of thing, right? So like just kind of going through those examples, and then hopefully by giving them more strategies for like actually spelling, like hopefully this will like take off a little better and like be able to kind of take off like in a different way, or like have more added to it, because it's clearly very blank right now.
Well, these
But,
are these
yeah, I
three are
think-
all great examples of equitable structures, right? Like when we talk about making thinking visible. So I know we're also talking about learning walls and the breadth of learning walls, the depth of learning walls. That's something that you've added to in your sharing a few times. You know, I know I could go further. I know this could be bigger, but when we look at making thinking visible as equitable structures to have students engage in certain learning intentions. So this one clearly is about spelling and enhancing vocabulary and helping that be an equitable and collaborative process, a community process. Those are all amazing outcomes, aren't they? So Melanie, I applaud you. You know, the previous one with the vocabulary and then students sharing, you know, broader words from scared and from sad, and then making meaning on their own, and that being visible and transparent, and again, collaborative and a community approach. I love all of these as examples of that. But definitely underpinning it is something you've lifted up, Melanie. Underpinning this is, what is the overarching learning intention here? Where does this fall in terms of those bigger, broader, well, the unit of study and the bigger assessment intent? These are all some of those pieces that allow for a bigger understanding or a deeper understanding, don't they? And so when you say something like, you know, I know I could go further with this, or I know I could be more intentional with this, that would be advice, is how do you attach these pieces to that overarching, it could be a learning wall, absolutely, or just your unit planning, right? Like if you're not ready to do a learning wall to summarize and evidence towards your unit planning, that would be something I'd love to know more about. I'm not putting it on a spot saying, Melanie, tell me more. It's where does this fall under the umbrella of your unit design and that larger conceptual intent? Does that make sense, Melanie? Some of that feedback?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like I know it's like we've been talking about like nonfiction text features, and I have actually been getting them to do. They've been working on an autobiography, and so they have to include some of these text features in it. So like a table of contents and like a little fact box and pictures and captions and stuff like that. Not all of them, but like some of the more like the ones that are more, I guess, I don't want to say popular. I don't know what word I'm trying to think of, but I guess the ones that you see more often in pictures, in books and stuff that they would know, and then using like character traits to like describe themselves and stuff like that. And this one, I guess, kind of would be ongoing, like learning,
Yeah.
you know, like spelling and stuff like that, right? Because it's like obviously it's ELA specific, but it's like broad across any unit or any kind of learning, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah. Erica, could you share some of your thinking around your comment in the chat?
Yes. Oh, I was just saying, when she was describing kind of the idea that once a student has put a word on the wall and then kind of gone through the learning about that word, to be able to teach it to future students is a nice feature, right? That kind of like expertise, but having it anchored by being on the wall and being visible and having gone through that process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was hoping you would share and revisit from Melanie sharing that piece. Is the learning wall is one thing. It's collaborative, it's communal, it's equitable, but how it provides opportunity for, just as you've said, Erica, students to teach students, where students become teachers themselves and they make meaning, and then it being transparent and visible. Gosh, they're going to do so unrehearsed and unprompted at times without our assigning.
I think the idea that it's a text that is equitable for all, in the sense that you can put things on it, but then also that you can use it to make meaning in whatever way that is. So if that's teaching a fellow student, if that's, you know, going up to that wall yourself to kind of complete something, it just becomes an anchor piece. And so I think that's the idea between it being like a finalized pretty version and it being an ongoing formative kind of collection of learning evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And Melanie, maybe you write it on your hand, right? Like today, make sure I reference or call students up to go to the learning wall. You had mentioned that sometimes you forget. I have to ground myself in that reminder every single day, not just to maybe add something to the learning wall, but to just go up and model my thinking and model some connections and get students to have a listen as to what I'm seeing and then invite them to do the same.
I
So that's
used
a
to
reminder.
find-
I add it to my lesson design. Really, it's like learning wall time. Model the model. Erica?
Yeah, I was gonna say I used to find it was a really good accountability measure for me as a teacher if I was using the wall as a space to add collaboratively and to do some intentional work around anchoring the like elevating the essentials, if you will.
Yeah.
So that was really good for me to like sit in my classroom and say, okay, like this wall, what's the purpose of it? Should I be adjusting some things or some things done? And I need to make space for new things, like how I'm gonna use this today or how am I gonna use this week? So that
Yeah.
we made it like that was an accountability measure in my teaching for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Melanie, for your sharing. Greatly appreciate it. Others in the space. Show and share.
I have quite a few of your samples, so if you want to speak to them and you want me to screen share, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Erica.
I can stream here in Nuvik.
I'll pull yours up, Gene.
I'm really well again. Whenever I do this, I get paranoid about like, is this what they even wanted? So I don't know, but I will say I was inspired by one of our. Well, I think you met Steve Dagger, the very loquacious animated
Love
consultant
Steve.
up here as well, and he worked with us just last week. And he was talking, and a lot of what we were discussing was about making learning visible and whatnot. And because I'm a bit of a dork, I in my limited real estate in my classroom, I put up a wall that says "Space for Molasses." And so what that is for all of our students to, of course, come up with their thick questions, thick as molasses, and anchor them onto the wall so that we can all see what they're thinking of beyond the scope of what we might cover in class. And then those will be visible for not only this class but for other classes who may or may not be doing the same unit that they just finished. So the molasses questions are coming up, and they're the kids are excited to again showcase their understanding of, in this case, we just finished Streetcar Named Desire. And so a lot of them had really profound questions that went beyond what we were discussing, and they were happy to post them on our molasses board. So that was kind of it. Just what you see here are just quick, projects that, again, in my for I need shelves and stuff. A lot of them were products of, again, just the inquiry model in various stages about them trying to, again, teach what they've learned through various outputs. So beyond the thick questions here, we have this one kid choosing to do a self-portrait, teaching us how that was from Indian Horse. And these are the Macbeth, the ones again that Eric was just showing, the Macbeth images. That the question was, how do you portray I guess the mood of Macbeth without words, save for the title, and it was all images. And I try to make room where I can. But the students are always, it's grade 10, 11, and 12 students. And I feel like I'm in like grade 3 or 4 because they all want to make sure their posters are up on the wall and their, dioramas are front and center. And they will take his down and put mine up. And there's a bit of a wrestling for the real estate there is. But I don't know, it's I don't know if you know The Crucible. That's one of the scenes where Betty wasn't waking up and there was profound panic in the Reverend's bedroom.
Pretty funny.
Love these,
But all
Gene.
these
Love
are
these.
the students are choosing what to create. Sorry?
I was just saying I love these, and I could see how in your classroom space there is clearly agency over how students are demonstrating their learning. Like, you know, the Macbeth example seems to me to be that kind of guided inquiry space in the pool where you're giving them some parameters, but within those parameters there's a whole lot of choice.
Yeah.
All students are creating that visual representation, but then when we look at these dioramas, there's obviously a lot more choice in terms of how they show their learning. Maybe not what they're studying or what they're analyzing or what they're reading. You probably assign the crucible. However, that's the non-negotiated space. But when it comes to showing their learning, there's a lot of agency and choice. Am I right there, Gene?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm trying to go on is just get away from always the scene questions and the multiple choice and have them again. This is one of their major assessments was where they were going to pick a way to demonstrate their learning of a certain, and then teach it to us, right? Because again, I think that's the big piece that I've always missed in my earlier years was having them teach what they know to the rest of them.
Yeah.
And,
Tell me about that.
stuff.
So what does that look like in your classroom, them teaching each other? I'm just fascinated because of course, right now I'm teaching English 12 myself, Gene. And so, I want to do that. What does that look like? And do they get into small groups? Are they in front of the whole room, teaching the whole room? Can you shed light on what that looks like for us?
Well, first of all, you got to have the right dynamic, I think, because a lot of them, I call them either the thinkers or the talkers. And sometimes the thinkers, they've got the ideas, but they're hesitant to go that next step to share them, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the others who jump at the chance. So you really just have to, I'm sure you know this, create a safe space where, like you said already, there's no pressure, right? Even here to share, and hopefully they will open up to what they do. I always tell them that, there was one of those inspirational posters way back in the day of Snoopy typing on his doghouse, and he said, "It's exciting when you've written something that you know is good." And so I share that Snoopy quote with my students saying, be excited about this stuff. You've got great stuff. Be proud of it. You own this. Now let's share this learning and share your knowledge and expertise. And that kind of opens a bit more, for them because, Snoopy he's a prophet, right? So what he says goes.
Totally.
But
totally.
Overall, I think the grade 12s by that time, I think they're more comfortable with this process, especially if we've done it for a few years before. So, we just did. They had to recreate they had to create a scene from Streetcar featuring the four major characters in a different setting, but demonstrating that dynamic between the four. And for this, they were to act out the scene they created, and they had to have other kids from the class volunteer to read the parts, and we had no problem with that. Like, they're very happy to share in each other's demonstration of their learning. So that's
Wow.
That's neat to see.
Yeah, very, very much evidence of the community of
But again,
learners that you're nurturing. Very much evidence of that.
Sometimes it's a real fight, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah, Gene, thank you for your sharing. And it makes me think of, so when you guys are risk takers, right? You're in this conversation. We are coming together with support this time together as support. We are scaffolding little steps for you to take. And so it's no surprise that you're willing to jump in the pool and try some things on for size, whether, it doesn't matter what it looks like. We're going to talk about it, right? Clearly. When I visit spaces where teachers are not as willing to take risks, I'll tell you some questions I hear about some of the things that we're talking about today. One question I often hear is, how am I going to assess that, Trevor? Like, I'll show them examples from things from my room, and I'll hear from teachers like, Trevor, what are you assessing there? Maybe Gene, like I had a student a couple of years ago, he carved this beautiful piece of beech wood. It was like a 7-foot long piece of beech wood that he trucked up to his house from the beach here in Victoria, and he chiseled in all these symbols. And it looks okay. Like, I'm not a craftsman myself. It looks okay. But when I look at the piece of wood, I could see all these symbols from a novel that he had chosen to read as part of his inquiry. And I know the novel really well. All the symbols throughout the book are up there in this piece, right? So when I show this photograph and when I talk about it, I often hear, Trevor, how did you mark that? What were you marking? What were you grading? Were you marking woodworking, or were you marking symbolism? And so the piece of wood is not the only thing students are bringing in as artifacts or evidence of their assessment, is it? Like in my class, I also assign some kind of piece of writing. Why? Because I'm a writing teacher. Typically with that kind of agency, it's some kind of reflective piece where they talk about themselves as capable learners, the competencies, what skills did they flex, what skills did they sharpen, what strategies did they utilize when the going got tough in building this artifact of their learning. So the piece of writing is something I can assess really clearly, right? And again, I do something that Jean does as well, as I get students to turn and talk and teach each other. So part of building an artifact is they have to speak to that artifact to a peer or a small group, maybe a group of 3 or a group of 4, where they have to hold up an ongoing conversation, maybe for 15 to 20 minutes. And I give all students in the class the same 5 or 6 questions to speak to and prepare for. And one of those questions is about the evidence, the formative, that led to the summative. So they have to capture evidence of them building, in this case, this carved piece of beechwood, this chiseled piece of beechwood. So again, I'm not assessing the diorama. I'm not assessing the beechwood. I'm assessing these spaces and these things that are right from our curriculum. Nowhere in our curriculum does it say carve a piece of beechwood. But the skills students are demonstrating, I'm asking them to write about and talk about, that's right in our curriculum. And so this is often a question I hear is, Trevor, that looks like a lot of fun, but how am I going to use that in my assessment? Or what am I going to mark? What am I going to grade? I know with all of your sharing, there is that type of assessment depth. I just want us to be sure that we are so transparent with that assessment intent that our students are gathering evidence as they go. And then we're calling on them to share that evidence out in some more formal ways to help us with giving them feedback on how they've grown as learners. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you,
always
Jean.
differentiate between what and how. And my favorite word is how. And it doesn't matter what it is, but how does it demonstrate evidence of what you've learned? I guess that's how I go with it. So
yeah.
makes
Wow.
sense.
So that is so, when we are bringing in the BC curriculum to the district in this year, next year, following years, the BC curriculum is so rich in the how. The curricular competencies are all skills that we have to teach towards. We have to design experiences where these curricular competencies are going to bubble up. And then we have to gather evidence to give feedback towards these curricular competencies. And they're very specific. Each class has, 10 to 20 curricular competencies. And then we have content standards. We have what standards, but there are a lot fewer of those than there used to be, than you're perhaps familiar with in the territories. So it's a little bit of both. It's, yes, the what is important, but gosh, the how in our instructional design, so these students are experiencing growth with these curricular competencies and these skills, so important. So that's coming, and it's clearly a part of this conversation, but that's definitely going to be a shift for some of us to plan more for the how of the learning and not merely the what of the learning. Let's do one more show and share of a learning wall. Anybody willing?
I can show mine. It's not so much of a learning wall as like a learning slide. So we're doing another school inquiry to do with like the Northern Lights or igloo building. So the learning wall page has on the other side of the school. So a lot of what I think Erica can show you is going over there. So for my class, we've been looking at how many ice cubes do we need to build our own igloos. So it's very open, as my class has like lots of kind of like different leveled abilities, and there's lots of freedoms for kids to show kind of what they've learned in math and how they can design an igloo. So we started it off by using like a few different learning and thinking routines. So first, like I had the kids kind of think pair share of like what they know about igloos and teach me, because I don't, I'm not from here. I don't really know too much about igloos. So that was really cool to see them teach me something new. And then I showed them like the picture in the middle, and we went through like, what do you see, think, and wonder? And there was some pretty cool ideas. So some of the kids were like, I wonder if they still use or like melt the ice to make the structure stronger. How long did it take like people to build the igloos? Some of the kids were like, oh, like I wonder like how sharp the machete is that was in the picture and things like that. So that was really cool just to have them kind of go through that thinking process before I even kind of explained what the project would be. So they have to come up with how many ice cubes, like estimate. So we're trying to do a lot of spiral learning with math. So they're estimating how many ice cubes they think they're going to need to build their igloo. And then they were able to plan and design. So I gave them a bunch of options and freedom of like how they came up with their estimation. So I gave like cubes, little blocks, grid papers, they could draw pictures, they could do it mathematically. So it was really cool to see like a big variety of ways of showing. And then I did like a little conference with each student to kind of just have them explain their thinking. Some wrote it down, some just did it orally, whichever they preferred to do. So one of them at the bottom was like, I counted how many blocks were on the grid paper. And the next step that's not on there was the kids have to show their estimate number in a variety of different mathematical ways. They have to have a minimum of 4, but then they can expand and stretch themselves to multiple ways, just using the concepts we've used learned in math so far. So like place value, blocks, addition, subtraction, multiplication. They could draw pictures, they could group. So it's like super open. And then they're going to get to build it, and then they will reflect on kind of their original number and then the number they actually used, and like what could they maybe do differently, or how could they like work on kind of estimating and planning like building project. But it's
Cool.
not displayed on a wall in my classroom, but it will be displayed like on a school wall.
Yeah. So Blair, what's your summative to this unit? What's the end conversation or the end thing?
So it's mostly like surrounding math. So it's that they can show a number in a variety of ways. So that's where like the question, like how many ice cubes do I need to build an igloo? So most of my assessment's going to come from them using kind of like their mathematical terms and being able to express their numbers in a variety of ways. So they'll take their estimated number and how they showed it, and then they'll do the same for the final one and just like reflect on it, see if they can make more challenging like equations, or if they kind of have noticed like, ooh, this, I didn't like the way I kind of represented this number, but I'm going to represent it this way for the final number.
Yeah. And I asked that specific question because I could see in this little slide here such rich formative getting us to that assessment intent. And so I just really wanted you to clearly give us what that assessment intent was. Because as you were describing this unit, I thought, gosh, I bet a student in your class could walk me through the learning from this and tell me where you're going with it, or tell me where they're going with it, which is, I think, a big strength of your evidencing here is, would you agree, Blair? A student could probably walk me through what this means and where they've been and where they're going.
Yeah, I've chunked it pretty well into steps. So each, like I have a big slide deck. So like each day we work on like a new step and we review. So I definitely think they would be able to. And we're using like the E3 thinking routine. There's like an example at the bottom. And so I definitely think they would be able to walk you through like where they started and where they ended up.
Cool. So a couple things to consider, Blair. I'd love for you to do that.
Okay.
could you do me a favor and in the next couple days, maybe just pick one student to have a conference with and show them this slide and
Okay.
say, walk me through this story and use it as feedback for you, right? Like
Okay.
we in this call right now, we feel like your students can do that. Just call over one student and have a little conference with them and see what connections they can make. And then after that, if you
Yeah.
feel like it was fruitful, then maybe this is a part of the summative. Maybe a part of the summative is not just them demonstrating that assessment intent, but also using the slide to reflect on from start to finish what they learned about themselves or how they became a more capable person,
Yeah.
or what math skills are evidence from this slide compared to what they just demonstrated in that summative task. If that conference you have in the next couple of days isn't as fruitful,
Yeah.
then that gives you some feedback and some data on what you need to do differently with this slide to get your kids ready to that place where
Yeah.
you could bring this up as part of the summative. Does that make sense, Blair?
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Like a little conference just to like summarize what they're learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that
Yeah.
would work. Yep.
Blair, can I ask you a
Cool.
couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you find like the statement that you said about like chunking and kind of scaffolding and having a master deck and then kind of
Yeah.
spiraling back? How do you find that helps your students who are kind of sporadic attenders? What are you noticing?
It definitely helps because then everybody, like today, they're working on it right now. It allows like every student to be working on the project, but they're all at different spots and they know kind of like, okay, like you're at step 1. So like we'll set them into groups. And then the kids that are finished can like expand on it. They can have little challenges to be like, okay, like you showed your number this way. So pick a different number. Like how could you expand or like show it in different ways? So it allows for other kids to kind of catch up. Then it also allows the kids that are on like track just to have extra time to work on those skills and like reinforce those math skills. And I find just having like slideshows and reviewing kind of the whole step every kind of lesson, just like a quick little like review, just reinforces it for those who have already seen it. And then the ones that haven't, they don't feel like they're targeted, if that makes sense. Like, oh, you missed school this whole week, so this is for you. Rather it's like, okay, like let's quickly like review like what are our learning goals is in that slide as well. So like I would like to kind of reinforce that every time we do this assignment. It's like, what are our learning goals? What were the steps that we did? Some of you might be on step 1. And I try to use like a mountain analogy with the kids that like, if you come to school every day, you're hiking every day, so you're going to be higher up the mountain. If you come once a week, totally, not totally fine, but like it's okay. You're going to just be where you are on the mountain and you're being successful. So I kind of just try and reinforce that in like every lesson, that it's okay for at different spots. What's important is that we keep moving forward.
How do you find like engagement and independence when you scaffold that way? Like,
this has been really good. So my class has a lot of high needs, but I found that giving them a lot of freedom to show kind of like their numbers or how they want to build their igloo in their own way has allowed them to be very independent. There was very few students who actually needed help with this. They maybe just needed a little guidance to be like if you're going to use these blocks, like this is a few ways you could use them. But there was very little kind of support that was needed within my class when they were actually kind of like estimating and building their like the first step of their igloos.
awesome. Thanks, Blair. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah, very much appreciate those added questions, Erica, because they got me thinking about equity and safety in the learning. Really, when students miss a few classes and they return and they know there's only one right way to do it and it's the teacher's way, they're going to come to class with a different sense of self, a different sense of belonging. They're either going to be defeatist and pessimistic, or they're going to be hopeful and optimistic. And, Blair, the bottom right corner of this slide where you're inviting them into the learning to demonstrate their understanding in a variety of ways, that's the optimism, that's the hope, that's the inclusivity, that's the belonging. So when they come, they know, hey, I have some strengths in my voice is invited to be a part of the trajectory of this learning, gosh, they're more likely to come back and feel that they're capable and know that they're capable. That's a big shift when we invite students in to demonstrate their learning or be a part of the learning in a variety of ways rather than just merely one way. So that was something I just wanted to lift up, Blair, from your sharing. Thank you. Cool. Erica, that was great. Great show and share. Lots of evidence. Friends, if you have evidence that you haven't sent Erica, please, that's an action item. Take note of it now. We appreciate seeing all the things. It helps me sleep good at night when I see into your practice. So I'm not like, what's going on up there? What's happening? The evidence really matters. And Eric and I deeply, deeply appreciate it. We're going to transition now to, some Trevor show and share of what my class looks like and sounds like and feels like. Definitely mirroring a lot of your sharing about assessment intent, scaffolding towards creating an invitation to the learning, and modeling how I not just structure for student voice, but make that student voice visible. So it's a good grounding space for me, but they see themselves in the learning quite literally. I'm going to invite you at any time to challenge me, to ask me a question, to get specific about anything I'm showing you. I want this to be a colorful conversation. And so, Erica, I know you're a critical friend. You've got no problem holding back with me. So please, if there's something I've shown you, let me know what your thinking is, everyone in the room. So I'm going to jump around. And just a kind reminder, these are the tenets of making thinking visible. So learning walls are one type of making thinking visible, right? One structure for making thinking visible. But when we think about this philosophy, this approach, these are the 5 things that I hope bubble up as I put things on my walls, right? I want to embrace questioning, my questions, their questions. Questioning as a verb. This is a learning muscle that we're constantly flexing. So I want to see evidence of questioning on my walls over time. I want to show them that I'm modeling an interest in learning. That learning isn't a transactionary experience where I assign a task, they do the task, and they hand it back in and I mark it. I want learning to be an experience where we're showing interest in the learning. We're learning from the learning, aren't we? We're learning from the learning. We are using the space to construct new understanding. We are listening to one another and we're capturing the listening. And then, of course, it's evidence, 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 evidence. Lots of documentation. So let's begin. The good, the bad, the ugly. I love anchor charts. So you'll see a lot of anchor charts. Nothing's really pretty, is it? We've got masking tape and you see dusty floors. And these first few slides represent my directedness, my intentionality, and how explicit I was in my first few days building a community of learners. So I know you all engage in rich community of learners work at the onset of your time with your scholars, and you continue to do so. I asked my students 5 questions in the first few days of school, and we captured their evidence in small groups on sticky notes. And so this was one question. And Jean, your sharing today really resonated with me because of this question. The question wasn't just, how do you show your learning? It was, if you could show me your learning in any way, how would you like to show me your learning? What are your learning strengths in terms of sharing out, displaying, producing, creating? And what was fascinating was my students put all these ideas on sticky notes. I didn't just give them one sticky note each. I said, you can take as many as you want. And we threw them up on my front board, my whiteboard. And then I asked one group to sort them into little clusters. And this is what they sorted into. They sorted into the top left is writing and essays. Fascinatingly enough, this is an English 12 class. A lot of them are going to go into post-secondary next year. Like I'd say roughly 80% of the kids in that class are going to be attending post-secondary. So something on their mind is, I want to become a stronger writer. So in surveying them and their needs and their goals, I'm taking that into consideration. Okay, they want writing experiences. Oh, well, that's in my curriculum. Yay. However, they're seeing how I'm embracing their interests, their strengths, their goals in this circumstance. And I'm going to use these to plan some experiences throughout our time together. A lot of them said a variety of online platforms, tools, slideshows, presentations, Canva, etc. And then down in the bottom left, they wanted to show their learning in creative ways, artistic ways, whether it's drawing or painting or even acting and performing. So now I use this not just to plan, but to go and I point at it. So right now we have an assessment intent that falls under the top left category. So I talk about how I surveyed you and I planned this based on a strength of yours. I'm really clear with I surveyed you and I'm using your feedback to guide next steps.
Trevor,
Yeah, Erica.
when you know that you're structuring learning according to the, say, top left-hand quadrant, because 80% of your students have it, like, you know, indicated in some way that that is what they are looking for. For students who really that's not the track that they feel they're on, and that isn't something that they feel they need the same concerted effort to develop their skills, do you tailor it based on what's come out?
Totally. Absolutely. I love doing that. You know, so looking at this data here before us, let's imagine me planning it across the swimming pool analogy, from the structured shallow end to the middle area to the free area, right? So I'm going to ask students to begin thinking about how they'd like to demonstrate their learning across that scope, across that scaffolding. But even in the shallow end, if, you know, I have 80% of my students writing a former literary analysis essay, there are going to be a few who that target isn't something that is, I don't have to assign that, right? There's nothing in the curriculum that says I have to do that. There's a lot of space for me to be responsive. So right now, in fact, that's what my students are doing. They're getting ready for a formal literary analysis essay, a research essay. But there are a few who are going to do something different. There's going to be a little bit of writing, but their product that they create is not the literary analysis essay. So I appreciate that, Erica, because we can be flexible and responsive to the people in our room. I think the biggest thing holding us back is our comfort level and relinquishing control, right? I'll just be frank. This kind of documentation is such a nice reminder for me to let go of the Trevor of 20 years ago and embrace the student identities and strengths and interests in the room. So Erica, you had mentioned earlier, you know, these visible thinking routines help you stay grounded in the work. I couldn't agree more. I'll show you where these are in my class, because right now it looks like this is tucked along the floor. You may be able to see that the left, there's a weird little hinge there. These posters are actually, they're hanging from a garage door in my class. I know that sounds really like state of the art, but the outside of my classroom opens up to a common area. And so my classroom has this garage door that when we open this, these posters, the community of learning posters, they actually hang from the ceiling like banners. And they're just such a nice overarching reminder of the things that we value together as a community of learners and how I'm going to use those. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So how are you going to show me your learning? This is a really neat one. This is, what are you curious about? I asked them, if I were to catch you lost in your learning, doing something that you're really, really into, what would I catch you doing? And you know what I'm doing with this question? I'm really planting seeds for free inquiry later. In the first few days of school, I'm asking this question because I want to get to know them better. And I want them to begin thinking about, how do we gather evidence towards these things that they're really curious about, and maybe share it out in a free inquiry towards the end of our semester together. You know, these seeds, if you were to ask your students this question at the start of the year, these seeds could be Wisdom Fest, couldn't it? Could be little components of Wisdom Fest. Like, I have one student who wants to create podcasts. Like, she's really engaging. She's a great speaker. She's tech savvy. She listens to podcasts. Can I give her structures and supports and space to do that? Absolutely, I can. And there's such a wide range here: podcasts, history, making music. I love the one in the bottom left, something digital. I'm not 100% sure. Like, how great is it that that student felt confident enough to put that on the board? The bottom right, just someone drew a picture of a basketball. I know exactly who that student is now that I've gotten to know him a bit better, right? So really, this particular thing allows a couple things. It allows something bigger later, planting the seeds for free inquiry later, man, it allows me to saddle up next to a kid and say, hey, tell me about the basketball game last night. Hey, I remember you're really interested in podcasts. Have you listened to one lately? And maybe I'm not that clear and explicit, but I could say a nice, clear reminder of me or for me to connect with kids on what they're interested in. Jean said it, that goes so far in creating safety and trust in collaborative communities. I'll show you a few more. Again, we're merely focusing here on my first few shares on building a community of learners, building a community of learners. How do you learn best? So we already talked about products. How do you want to show me your learning? Now it's how do you learn best? What are the best ways for you when you're learning new information? I actually gave them 4 ideas to consider. Do you learn best reading something, watching something, listening to something, or doing something, like building something with your hands? And they brought up all their sticky notes, and then another group sorted them. And this is what the data tells us. Look how few said listening. I was blown away. I thought students loved to listen to story, listen to a podcast, listen to each other talk, right? Listening actually had very few data points. What was the largest one? Watching. I'm okay. What do I do for that? So now this allows me to plan learning experiences that start from a strength-based perspective, right? Just as Blair was modeling, invite, invite, invite. Provide ample opportunity for equitable entry points to the learning, low floor, high ceiling. My responsibility with this data is to use it to plan some learning now. Jean, I actually talked about you and your work with Cole and thesis statements as an example here. I said, we're going to craft thesis statements, and let me tell you what a school I know did recently to turn that into an experience. So it wasn't this weird, like, we're going to build something with our hands. It was, we're going to do something. We're going to have an experience that's going to shape an outcome, maybe a non-negotiable. But our entry into that non-negotiable outcome, it's going to be different. Are you game for that? I think that's a really important part of having these conversations that I'm describing now is, can we provide some examples and some context? Remember that piece of beech wood that I told you about? Well, it's in my class. It's in the corner of my room. And when I was asking my students that question about how do you like to show your learning, I went over and I pointed to that, and I did a show and share. And then I went over and pointed to a piece of art. And then I brought up a piece of digital. So I'm showing students a whole bunch of different examples to spur some thinking. So this poster, again, see how we've sorted it? We've clustered it. Who did the sorting? Just to really drive that home. Did I do the sorting or did they do the sorting? They did the sorting. They're flexing that skill. They're building the learning with me. Let's go to another one here. This was really awesome. What a vulnerable question to ask my kids. What attributes do you admire in a teacher? I said, okay, no naming names, but I know you've had teachers who haven't really resonated with you. What can I do so this experience is meaningful and successful for you? And these are the things that they told me. And again, you see some sorting here. I love the left, right? No homework, easygoing, relaxed, allows class time for studying. Chill. Can I be chill? I think I could be chill. Yeah, I can be chill. Flexibility. Like, look at all the flexible and understanding and empathy here. Caring. Oh, here's flexibility up here. What's down here? Understanding. Varied projects. Up here, enthusiastic, excited to teach their subject. You know how many kids told me that one of their worst experiences in an English class was when the teacher just wasn't excited about teaching English. They weren't excited about what they're assigning. They weren't excited about what they were reading, what they were talking about. Teacher excitement matters. And that doesn't mean that we have to be a cheerleader. Like, rah, 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 Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. No, we have to show them we're curious too, that we're interested in their learning. So it's not that we're cheerleaders, it's that we're inquirers ourselves. Kids, if we're going to ask them to inquire, Let's be curious ourselves and be learners alongside them. I use this data always now. Like, okay, you want me to be flexible. How can I create some safe space right now to be flexible? How can I relinquish some control to show them that I care and I'm empathetic? Just zooming out here, the last poster that is up on the wall is, I asked them what their competency strengths are. So there are 7 competencies in our classroom that we're focusing on. They're right from the curriculum: collaboration, critical thinking, curiosity, communication, empathy, self-regulation. So I asked students, of these 7, what do you think is one of your strengths? What do you feel like you do really well? Because I want to build learning around your strengths. And this is what they said. Again, we clustered these and then we posted them. You know what I do now is this is how I'll randomly pair kids off occasionally. I'll say, okay, I want you to find a friend in the room to work with on this activity, but they have to balance out a competency strength of yours. Meaning Erica will say, I'm really, really good at self-control, self-regulation. She can't find a friend in the room to work with that also has that as a strength. I want to balance it out. So Erica has to go find someone who's a strong collaborator. So they're actually learning from each other how to learn better. So it's not a popularity contest. Like Erica wants to go work with Steve because they hang out all day in the office. No, Erica has to go find Blair because Erica has seen Blair strongly collaborate and Erica wants to work with Blair in that way on this task. So I use this data and I'm actually really clear with them on how I'm going to use this data. So it's not just a pretty post. It's not a pretty poster. It's another poster. It's not just a poster on the wall. It guides instruction, it guides interaction, and it guides planning. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. So how do you show your learning here? Here's just a little video spanning where it is in my classroom. So when the garage door is closed, you can see these are on a wall, right? When the garage door opens, this is what it looks like for students in the room. And I don't want you to install a garage door. It doesn't matter. But you can see when the door goes along the ceiling, they hang down like banners, right? Can you do that? I don't know what the rules are against you standing on a chair and pasting something to the ceiling. Absolutely. Use your physical space creatively to show your students that when you're surveying them and co-designing, it stays. It's a part of the culture, the community of learners. So I threw a lot at you there. We're just talking about community of learners right now. I have a few other things I'd want to show you. I'll just pause. Any connections or questions, or anybody want to, go deeper into anything I shared? What do you think, Erica? Is that the sound of deep thinking? Is that the sound of deep thinking? Maybe. Erica, how about you? Anything on your side? Connections, questions?
I was just wondering, like, if you're, in these conversations and you, like that slide or the chart that talks about kind of like what do you admire in a teacher, that opens up that conversation to teachers who maybe don't activate in the same way. Like, are you, what's the feedback from students like about learning in this environment and then having to transfer their learning to an environment where this isn't happening?
That is such a good question because my kids ask me that question. They actually say, this is great, but the bell's going to, well, we don't have bells at our school, but at the end of the class, I got to go to another teacher, Mr. McKenzie. Underlying that is, what's the point of this? It works here, great here. What's the point? Undeniably, what I lift up there is these skills that we're flexing here, this awareness of what you need as a learner that we're understanding here, you could take and apply to any setting. Any setting. Even if you walk into a teacher's classroom where they say, this is the learning, I'm going to smack it on top of you, this is my plan. As you get to know yourself better as a learner, you're more adaptable, you're more flexible, and you're growing these skills across contexts. So it will perhaps be a little bit more rich, or the learning and the growth will be accelerated in my setting, but that skill set is going to be something that they're going to be able to transfer and apply to any setting. when we talk about it in that way, as the learning here, our curricular competencies here don't just belong in English. These are life skills. Kids begin to nod their head. That's the old curriculum, to be quite honest. The old curriculum is, this is what you are as a science student. This is what you are as a math student. This is and stay in your lane. You're an English student. Now these skills are transferable. They're transdisciplinary, and they take them with them as they leave the desks in my room. So Erica, I'm glad you raised up that question, because kids, especially at the high school level, that's a tension for them. This is great in here, but I'm going to go over there in a couple minutes. And so raising that these skills are transferable, shows the authenticity in the curriculum, to be quite honest. Anybody else? Cool. This is a neat one. So now we're talking about, kids want me to be flexible. How can I be flexible? Again, you're seeing the good, the bad, the ugly. You're seeing my magnets. You're seeing my chicken scratch writing. I spent $5 on these calendars. Honestly, I bought them, on, what do you call it? Deep discount, right? And I have all 5 months of my semester. So we started in February. The far right that you don't see is June. And what I ask my students to do is to put a polka dotted sticker on days where they know they're going to be stressed or busy or overwhelmed, or they have other responsibilities. Because I tell them this story, I've been hired by so many schools around the world to help them create an assessment calendar, right? So imagine like a school, assessment calendar is transparent to all teachers in the school to create equity and wellness for kids. That's the intent. So we create this like, okay, let's plan our assessments across the whole school. It's chaos. It's confusion. You know what ends up happening? Erica logs in first, and Erica dumps all of her tests or assessments throughout the calendar. And then I go in and I'm like, well, where do mine fit? And like, there's no wiggle room. There's no wiggle room in doing collaborative assessment calendars. So what I do is I ask my kids, tell me, where are you busy? And I'll do my best to be flexible during those times. The neat things that surface from this, it's not just the flexibility, it's not just the collaboration, it's the awareness of self for my scholars. They're thinking of the learning here and their lives, like their rehearsals, the musical, the basketball tournament, the shifts at work, right? They're becoming more aware of what works for their learning. So what do I do then? Like, look at the week of the 13th. That was pretty busy, hey? Look at the week of the 13th. That's pretty busy. So what due date do I pick on that week for a task? If I have a task that students have to turn in, what do I do? Well, I'm going to hurt someone's feelings if I pick any one of those days, aren't I? From the one person on the 18th to the 4 people on the 13th to the 5 people on the 14th, someone's going to be like, hey, man, you're not meeting my needs. You're all talk. I give them a due date window. I say across the span of this chunk of time, you need to turn in that task. So for you, you need to think about what works for you. That person on the 18th is going to pick a due date window or due date of the Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday they're going to submit. My other students earlier in the week, they're not going to submit on those days. They're going to submit later in the week. A beautiful thing happens to my assessment practice. I have to be honest, okay? You know that student on the 18th who said, I can't turn it in there, and he hands it in earlier in the week? There are maybe 2 or 3 things that I'm assessing on that day. I give that feedback. My feedback is not stressed. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not exhausted. I don't have assessment fatigue. I'm only doing 2 or 3. I'm only doing 2 or 3 per day across the whole week. I find my students are getting my best assessment, my best self when it comes to assessing and giving them feedback, because it's like a slow burn across the week. So when I ask them what attributes you admire in a teacher and they tell me flexibility, this is one really transparent structure. One really transparent structure. The red streaks, that's our spring break, right? So they've got some time off. So I need to plan learning and scaffold accordingly. So as I look at my week, look at the 27th, like I need to revisit them today when I come in and say, hey, everyone, reflect on your week, stand up, put a sticker on, reflect on your next week, stand up and put a sticker on. So this is what we call due date windows. Due date windows. And up close and personal what it looks like. We'll transition into something else now. Transitioning into something else. This is a favorite of mine to do. And again, making the thinking visible. I'm not showing you a learning wall yet. I'm just showing you different ways that I'm making the thinking visible. On the left and on the right. So let's start on the left. The task, the big assessment task for the majority of kids right now is a literary analysis essay. That's the outcome. They chose that. I did not choose that. So right now I have a colleague from the University of Victoria. We're doing some ongoing research around the power of inquiry and student agency in my class. So we're actually interviewing kids, surveying kids, looking at data. We're looking at this data across a couple years. So he's in every day right now. Every day he's coming and watching me teach. It's fantastic having a friend in the room. Having a university colleague, because, you know, remember I said 80% of my kids want to go to university next year? Guess what? They're asking him questions because he's in the room. They're saying, okay, his last name's Passivicius. Isn't that a great name? Passivicius. They say, Mr. Passivicius, and they says, Dr. Passivicius as a joke, right? Mr. Passivicius, what do you want first-year university kids to be able to do? What would be a skill, right? And so he talks about all these competencies and these dispositions that are in our curriculum. So all the how of my lesson design, kids are seeing that those skills are going to help them next year. And then he says, writing is a critical skill, right? Like we want students who are strong writers. It's not just their skill set, it's also their writing. And so the students chose literary analysis essay. I did not assign that. That was a student choice. So you know what we did next is we co-designed success criteria for a literary analysis essay. Do you see the white pages there surrounding the anchor chart on the left? Each one was from a different group of 3 students, 3 or 4 students in pods in my room. They had a piece of paper and there's one scribe, one documenter. And then the group is talking about if the target's going to be a literary analysis essay, what are the indicators, the success criteria for literary analysis essay? And so in a small group, they're spilling these ideas onto their own little white rubrics, essentially. And I'm walking through the room, Michael and I, Mr. Passivicius, Dr. Passivicius, we're walking through the room and we're asking them questions and we're lifting up things and we're saying, you know, Graham over here mentioned thesis statements. Just want to make sure, does everyone have, so we're confirming and affirming, and then we're adding in, we're backfilling into the holes that they're missing. And then I asked one group, I said, okay, would you be comfortable, just one group, would you be comfortable standing up and sharing what you've created on your rubric? So I pick a group that I know is comfortable sharing. And then I give them 3 minutes to rehearse. And then when they stand up, 2 or 3 kids stand up to talk about their rubric, I challenge the room. I say, I want you to really listen, flex that skill, and look at your rubric. What are they missing from theirs that you have? Or what are you missing from yours that they have? So everyone in the room in this round is adding to and refining their rubrics. And then from all those rubrics, we curate them to a master list. You can see my chicken scratch writing again, right? And then that's the thing that goes on the wall. That's the thing that gets posted. And you can see clipped to the bottom right are all their rubrics that they co-designed. The investment of this are multitude. And I write about this, I speak about this often. Investment number 1, sense of belonging. It's an invitation, just as Blair was modeling, just as you all were modeling during our show and share. It's an invitation. Strong sense of belonging builds community. Benefit number 2, clear understanding of what they're going to be assessed on and how they're going to be assessed. They have a deeper understanding. Number 3, it's in their own words. It's not in teacher jargon. All that language is student language. Number 4, because it's visible, what a great opportunity for them to reflect and self-assess along the formative journey. And then lastly, they're more able to strongly peer assess and self-assess because of that deeper understanding of the success criteria. This is an important one that I'd love for us to engage in. If I were going to assign anything, it would be, think of your assessment intent, co-design the success criteria for the assessment intent. Think of your summative, and then I want you to start that learning journey by co-designing the success criteria, doing an activity like this. Now, this literary analysis success criteria that you see here before you, it was actually the second co-designing of assessment criteria that we did together. You can see behind the literary analysis on the wall is a red one. That was another composition we did in the first couple of weeks of the school year, of the semester. And we actually use that co-design success criteria, that smaller composition, as the jumping off point for this literary analysis one. And I'm going to continue that frame. The next time we have a summative, we're going to use this as the jumping off point. So if we get to a place like Gene where kids have choice over diorama or painting or performance, etc., we're going to dip into all the success criteria that we've been adding to our understanding, our repertoire, and we're going to start from that foundation first for assessment understanding, and then we're going to add to it. And you can see if we have a collection of assessment criteria across time, wow, students can actually build their own, couldn't they? Like, I anticipate a student who's building a diorama could maybe, after having done this with me several times throughout the year, build their own rubric for that. So that would be another benefit to making the thinking visible, making the assessment visible to provide more agency over time. So that's a big one. Co-designing assessment criteria. Any questions, comments, considerations? I'll slow down and have a sip of water. I know what you're thinking. Trevor had his coffee today. Ooh, he is going.
Hey, sorry, Trevor.
Yeah.
Video here. As you know, I can see, you know, you're helping the kids, or they're helping you design what they want to be tested on and such. So I'm curious, are they part of the rubric making process, or because you've got the success criteria? So.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful question. There are some rubrics that I'm forced to bring into my class. For example, there's a rubric where our faculty has agreed for that performance task, here's the success criteria for that. So I'm kind of mandated to use that rubric. I don't merely give that rubric or smack it on top of kids. I tuck that aside and I use that rubric as a blueprint to this conversation. Remember when I said that I'm going to backfill success criteria into the things that they're missing? It's that mandated rubric that I'm looking at and seeing, okay, what is it that they're missing? Can I ask them some more questions to elicit that? Or do I need to just say, hey, this is a non-negotiable? My colleague Michael and I, we were talking throughout this co-design experience because Michael had never done this with kids. I was saying that it's almost like a meter and there's a needle on the meter where the students can take us so far, given our questions and their prior knowledge and our nudging. Where is that meter? And what questions can take us a little bit further? And then the rest of the way, I need to guide them in a variety of ways to get towards that blueprint. So the rubric they create here looks an awful lot like the blueprint, but it's in their language and they have a deeper understanding of it. So I don't know, does that really answer your question? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, no, that definitely does answer my question and kind of my understanding of inquiry about being a guide. Because I have been, you know, we've been experimenting a lot with inquiry, but you know, sometimes we find that maybe the kids are going off on a tangent that we need to kind of bring them back. So that was more or less you affirmed that, you reaffirmed kind of directing. It's almost like there's a lot of choice, but it's almost like there's a little bit of an illusion of freedom. You know, and then us as teachers in this case, you need to direct them towards a little bit where they want to go while giving them
Yeah. You know, I think there's a ton of space to build it together, and that is liberating. Building it together, that is freeing. Building it together, absolutely. You know what was really interesting is one of my kids had a light bulb moment, and I'm just so thankful he was brave enough to say it out loud. because he asked me the question and I said, could you ask that out loud to the whole class? And the question was this. The question was, in my first year university, will I be given all the success criteria on this assignment? I said, could you ask Michael that question in front of everyone? And so he put up his hand and Michael was on the other side of the class and said, Michael, I've got a question. And I know Michael's game to be playful, right? And my student asked Michael the question and Michael said, no, I would never give my kids this much success criteria, my students. And my kids' jaws fell. And then another student said, what would you give them? And he said, I would probably give them the question they need to research and answer. I'd probably give them some things around like MLA format and structure and word count and a due date. And that's it. And the kids were like, oh my God. Because now they see that the success criteria that we're cultivating and me preaching about, I need you to have a deep understanding of the assessment criteria so you could self-assess and now my kids are like, they really see how this experience and this skill is actually guiding them to something really important, really helpful in the future. That's life though, isn't it? Like nowhere in our life is anyone going to hand us the success criteria and say, this is the map. What are the skills we're flexing to encourage and nurture capable people so they can go into these different settings more aware of what works for them, their strengths, more reflective, helpful, super helpful. So
Yeah,
this will be, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of like agree with you. It seems very metacognitive. And I know we've had conversations, colleagues, you know, about, you know, prepping kids for post-secondary education, or even just like preparing the middle school kids for high school where there's not as much, you know, direction or hand-holding. So I like that you've taken the actual process itself and kind of given it almost a little bit from your own perspective, right? This is what I need to do, but you need to meet me there with this sort of criteria that you've decided upon. So, you know, I think from almost the ground up, it gives them a little bit of that ownership and hopefully kind of educates them on the need to start picking up the slack. And, you know, you've got a lot that you need to do on your end. I really like it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, they do have a lot to do on their end, right? And this notion of competency development, you know, what does it mean to be a capable person, right? And how are we creating safe spaces for these skills and these dispositions and these understandings to have them grow through these over time, for sure. So I was going to say, this is going to be an action item. I'm going to ask you kindly to consider co-designing success criteria with your kids. Co-designing success criteria with your kids. And I've kind of laid this out in a fashion where it's collaborative, it's equitable, it's an invitation, and then it's visible. So it's really hitting a lot of the parameters, a lot of the characteristics that we've been nurturing as a cohort, right? Around inquiry and the capable person. So this will be an action item, but I want to continue. I did say I have a few. We are building a learning wall. We are building a learning wall. And all these different samples of evidence around the room are all part of this big learning wall. And my students chose the novel 3-Day Road by Joseph Boyden. And the big overarching question that we're exploring is, who are you and what shapes your identity? Who are you and what shapes your identity? So they did some pre-writing around that. That was that first composition talking about who they are, what they're interested in, what shapes their identity, what are their beliefs and values and experiences. It was a really amazing composition. But identity in this novel is like, whoa. Like Eric and I were talking about this unit that I'm planning with them, and she said, Joseph Boyden, isn't he the Pretendian? Right? And he did, didn't he, Erica? Like that was a big cloud of, can we say shitstorm? Forgive me, for Boyden, claiming to be Indigenous, not, and having written this book. And oh my goodness, it's a powerful book. But now we can explore that question, who are you and what shapes your identity, through the lens of the author, not just the characters and not through self. Like it provides a dynamic that's really, really rich. So my students in groups, again, remember they're in pods of 3 or 4. We did just a simple protagonist character sketch the other day, where in their groups, they had one scribe. And I said, based on the first 75 pages that you've read, what are the things that surface for you for each of these characters? And they came up with a lot. And of course, there's some, I don't want to say superficial pieces to the character sketch, but there are some, like, you know, some stuff all character sketches should have. And then there's some richness, there's some dispositions, there's even some symbolism creeping up on some of their little posters here. This activity, this little T-chart activity, this is information that's going to go into their literary analysis towards the end. So I'm not doing anything with my learning walls or my formative that isn't going to support them as a scaffolded step towards the summative. You can see there are clips up here on this first poster. Each group has their posters behind. So you can see here, each poster, each group, it's up there. So at any given time, students can go up, flip through, we can pull it off, bring it back. You know what's going to happen by page 200 or 250? We're going to compare this to what is different. I'm going to use that thinking routine. I used to think and now I think. Let's look at what you thought of Elijah at the first 75 pages and what you think of Elijah now. The data in the room allows that formative step to occur. Again, I chose literary analysis essay because my kids told me that was the target. And now I'm creating structures to evidence the formative towards that summative. So this is one area of the learning wall. Really, really simple. Everyone's attached to it. Notice how there's no individual character sketch. I didn't say, Erica, you've got to do one in hand, one in. The learning is communal. It's conversational. It's together. It's equitable. They have time to connect and collaborate and talk, and also time to process and think and listen. So it's not transactional, is it? Like, I handed Erica a task, character sketch, gave Erica 10 minutes, turn it in. I mark it. It's communal. We're learning from one another. And then it's visible. It's up there. It's equitable. So if Erica missed class when we did this, guess what? I say, hey, Blair, can you take Erica over to the learning wall and walk Erica through and teach her what we did? Blair's like, yeah, I got your back. Did you see that, Erica? Blair's got your back. This is one step towards the bigger learning wall. And I asked students, I said, is there anyone artistic in the room who feels like they'd love to sketch out our 3 protagonists? And one student, Alex is her name, she put up her hand. She spent about 10 minutes creating this sketch for one of our characters. This is going to be, we're early into this phase, excuse me. This is one character where we're going to, around the character poster, sticky note evidence of them and their identity and how it's changing or how we're learning about it throughout the novel. So we're going to have 3 character spaces throughout the room where the evidence that they generate here, they can compare it, they can contrast it, they can make connections across the sticky notes. Undeniably, we're going to go to that poster when it comes time to write the essay. And I'm going to say, what's the best evidence up here that you're going to put in your essay? So it's really communal. So I can have a student, like, I'll pick on Tori. I can have a student like Tori who's like, Tori did not commit one sticky note for one reason or another. I really don't care, Tori, but I care about you and your success. And Tori's going to go up and look at everyone else's connections and be a learner and have something there to provide Tori an equitable entry point into success. So if Tori's missed 2 weeks for one reason or another, Tori has a chance to connect with the learning that's happened. Sorry, Tori. Thumbs up from you too, okay? Yeah, good. Just so I know you got my back. So I've got 3 learning walls happening for each character. We planned out a 5-paragraph essay. Why? Because there are 3 main characters, not because I love a 5-paragraph essay. There are 3 protagonists that we're examining identity through. We're contemplating a 4th now with Boyden. Let's examine the author's identity. So we're contemplating right now as a class, do we want to add a 4th paragraph in? Last week, you know what my student said? If we do a 4th, will we get a better mark? Whoa, what a provocative conversation I stepped into now, right? Is more better, right? That's the conversation we're having right now. Is 2 worse than 4? Like if a student turns in a 4-paragraph essay, do they automatically lose marks? This is all assessment conversation we're having right now as a class. Why? Because we co-design the assessment, the success criteria together. So we're having a lot more conversation around these things. You know, underpinning this poster, what you don't see is my deep understanding of the curriculum, right? Like this poster represents certain curricular competencies that I'm scaffolding towards them demonstrating. So it's not a pretty poster. It's not a pretty series of activities. All of it is scaffolding towards these curricular competencies that my students are going to demonstrate, or maybe not demonstrate, gather evidence towards. So I know I've thrown a lot at you again. Questions, comments? Anybody want to get interrogative with me? I wonder if any of you are thinking, Trevor, this is great. You're an English teacher. It's so obvious you're an English teacher. And if you're not teaching in this subject area, of course there are ties, aren't there? What are the ties here? What's your summative intent? How is your learning visible and structured so there are formative steps towards the summative? How is that inclusive and inviting of all? And how can you co-design the success criteria towards that summative? So don't do that thing then where, Trevor, you're an English teacher that only works in your context. No. What are the through lines am I sharing that you're going to apply to your context? What you're teaching and who you're teaching. Okay, let's go to another one. Erica, any questions, comments from you? I know sometimes you wait patiently to see if the room has anything, and then you share anything that you want to raise up.
I just wanted to ask about choice all the way through. So when you were talking about the debate between 2 and 4, or should we add 1, like, are you open to the possibility of negotiating weight of characters and why you may not want to include all 3? Or like, if a student comes with something that obviously is important to them, obviously shows that they're deeply engaged with the process, but it may not be an intended outcome that you had thought, like, is there openness there?
There is openness there. So in British Columbia, we have a proficiency scale. So this is coming your way, my friends. And the first step of the proficiency scale is emerging. Then we transition into the space called developing. Then we transition into the space called proficient. And then we transition into this place called extending. So my students are familiar with this proficiency scale. I've actually drawn it on the board several times. So as we're mapping out success criteria, we're actually backfilling it into the proficiency scale. So what success criteria do you really have to demonstrate beautifully, or what success criteria is the most important to get you proficient or extending? So that's one piece of the conversation that allows that openness. Again, it's openness, but it's within the structures, isn't it? The proficiency scale. Another neat piece of that, friends, is I actually have students look at exemplars across the proficiency scale. It may not be a literary analysis essay for these 3 characters of 3-Day Road. It may be 4 paragraphs, 1 at emerging, 1 at developing, 1 at proficient, and 1 at extending. And we examine those so they could see how there's certain success criteria in all, but it's demonstrated more beautifully the deeper you go into the proficiency scale. I know I'm introducing some language that some of you are unfamiliar with: proficiency scale, emerging, developing, proficient, extending. This is definitely coming your way, of course, with the BC curriculum. What's really fascinating is proficient is proficient. Proficient is the target. Proficient is all kids are at grade level. Extending is they're going above and beyond, right? So proficient is the hope for all of our kids. Emerging isn't a failing mark. Emerging does not mean your kids are failing. It means that they've got some skills that they've demonstrated. So from emerging to developing to proficient to extending. There's some great documentation. There's one document, Erica, you and I haven't even had a chance to unpack yet together, but I anticipate you may have seen it already. It's about an 80-page assessment philosophy document by the Ministry of British Columbia that talks about a lot of these changes and how to use this language in a setting where, guess what I have to do at the end of the year? I have to give a percentage, right? So it talks about how we can use language and structures such as a proficiency scale and then get our kids a final mark, a percentage that they need, and what the rigor and the clarity in that assessment process looks like and sounds like and feels like. So a ton of wiggle room, Erica. I think Blair said it best today's that she had a math conference with kids. Guess what we need to do? We need to sit with kids and have conversations around their strengths, their goals, and their desires. Maybe a student will say, I only want to talk about 2 characters. I don't want to talk about all 4. Can they still demonstrate proficiency talking about 2? Is more better? No. So those are conferences that we have with small groups, one-on-one, and conversations we have as a class, Erica. Erica, was that too muddying of the waters talking about proficiency scale? I hope not.
No, it's good. It's good to go deep. I think that's important. I think you need to know how they need to know how they're being assessed. It's a cornerstone of the conversation.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, it's scary, friends, how many classrooms I visit around the world where the kids have no idea how they're being assessed. The teacher does, the kids don't, right? So how are we setting the kids up for success if they don't even know how they're going to be assessed, let alone the success criteria? And even better, wouldn't it be great if we built the success criteria with them so there's that transparency throughout the learning? Undeniably, they're going to do better if we go through that level of collaboration, co-designing, and transparency. Last, this is the last thing I want to show you, my friends. These are 7 posters. I referenced them earlier when I showed you one of the Community of Learner posters, which was, what are your competency strengths? Here in my class, we have a competency poster for each of the competencies. So this is critical thinking. And students actually created these. So I asked students in small groups to pick an icon or design, trace it, fill it in. And so the posters in the room, these competency posters, are actually created by my kids, right? So here we have critical thinking. Here's a little video. Here we have curiosity. Here we have collaboration. No, that was communication, excuse me. Here we have collaboration. Here we have creativity, self-control, regulation. And then last, we have empathy. Pretty neat, right? So far, so good. I'll just pause for a sec on this self-regulation competency. So the students created the poster. The competencies were non-negotiable. These are Trevor language. These are 7 skills that we're going to focus on this year. Sharpening and growing in and reflecting on and thinking about and talking about. I'm going to design lessons where I want you to reflect on self-regulation. I'm going to design lessons where you're going to experience collaboration, right? So I chose the 7, they created the posters. The little pink insets are success criteria that we co-designed. And I do a new one every time I have a new class. And then I laminate them so they're up there. So when students are moving things around, they don't get torn up or ripped off. So what does self-control, what does self-regulation look like, sound like, and feel like? Those are indicators that they've helped us contribute to these posters. So it's taken the big meta of self-control down to some indicators, some really clear things that we can do or think of, or I can call on them to reflect on. Now, the Bitmojis are really cute, aren't they? Look at these Bitmojis. Aren't they cute? The Bitmojis represent students setting personalized goals towards one of the 7 competencies. So you can see I have a lot of grade 12s. I have one really tall grade 12 who put his all the way at the top there, Owen. I have grade 12s. A lot of them want to work on self-regulation, self-control as their competency goal. So obviously, having these visible, guess what it allows me to do? It allows me to connect with kids and help them gather evidence towards their goal. I could sit down with Owen and say, Owen, today you really flex self-regulation, self-control. How did you do that? And he can tell me a few things and I could use that evidence in my documentation. I could ask him, hey, write me a little paragraph and we're going to add that to your portfolio. Or even best, you know what I do come report card time? I sit with students, I ask them questions about their goals, and I write it directly into their report card. As I'm interviewing them and they're talking at me and they're reflecting and they're bringing their identity to the conference, I write it directly in the report card. So there's a lot going on here, isn't there? Look at, there's Owen there, there's McGuire, there's Sophia, right? Going back, I just want to go back there. So students choose a goal for the term. At the end of the term, I ask them to consider changing their goal. Just because students here are focusing on self-regulation doesn't mean they get out of being collaborative. Just because students are choosing this poster doesn't mean they're not going to be asked to reflect on other posters. This is the one that is most meaningful to them. This is the one that they want to grow the most. Oh gosh, that meaning, that purpose is so important. I've created the structure, 7, made it visible, posters, created depth and clarity, indicators, and now the Bitmoji is them saying, this is what's most meaningful to me. This is my entry point. When we create entry points of high meaning and purpose and personalized entry points, right? Personalized entry points, students feel included. Students feel a sense of belonging. They're more able to grow towards something that they want to strive to be. So I'm going to back out away from this process a little of, I showed you a lot. I showed you the community of learners posters, the due date windows posters, and then co-designing learning, co-designing success criteria, and then the beginnings of my learning wall. You know what we're going to do the next time we get together? I'm going to show you the completed learning wall for these character sketches. And then I showed you competencies here, and I zoomed in on them setting personalized goals. The last thing here, this is another wall in my class. This is the inquiry cycle we use in my class. This is the inquiry cycle. We've got these 4 posters, sketch notes down below. I use these images and these resources to constantly refer to and guide students through co-designing with me. From planning, retrieving, processing, creating, etc. So where does my provocation fall into play in that inquiry model? Now, of course, this is an inquiry cycle I use. We also referred to this at the onset. We've also got the BDEC inquiry cycle, which we're encouraging more teachers to begin living and breathing and working with in their own practice. But I just wanted to show you one last poster. Like, Trevor talks the talk and walks the walk. He's doing these things in his practice, and I wanted to shed light on what it could look like and sound like and feel like. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and it's time for homework, right, Erica? I want to assign some homework. The homework is twofold, my friends, twofold. Number 1, it's to continue to grow and contribute to your learning wall. So that's number 1. I would love like a subset to that homework to be what I challenged and asked kindly for Blair to do, which was to call a scholar up to the learning wall, whether it's digital or physical, and hey, walk me through our learning and use it as a point of data for you to reflect on. So that's one piece of homework. Let's all continue to contribute to our learning wall, and then let's call a scholar, a student up, and ask them a few questions about the learning. Can they walk us through that story? And it's not a presentation, right? We're not doing this in front of the whole class. It's not for marks. It's, can we have a conversation? And if they look at the wall blindly, like, you know, deer in the headlights, can we ask them some specific questions, go up and point? Can we model some thinking? So I'd love for those 2 things to happen. But that's one piece of the homework. The second piece of the homework is I want you to co-design success criteria with your kids. This forces you to know your assessment intent. What's your summative? And then break that down into indicators of success with your kids, and then begin backwards designing formative experiences to scaffold towards that assessment intent. So what's your target? Can it be something that is collaboratively decided on or even rich in student choice? And then can we break that down into indicators of success? And then can we backwards design formative assessment processes and experiences towards that.
Trevor, that message is in the chat for you.
What's the message? Let me see. So my first reporting period hasn't come up yet. It's coming soon. I have a few more weeks to get ready for that. Great question. So the assessments, they're right from the curricular competencies and the content standards. So it's like I could break those open right now and pull out a few from each category and demonstrate across that proficiency scale evidence towards each of those standards. Now, we're still early. We're still really early, and I'm taking my sweet time. Why am I taking my sweet time? What's the most important thing for me to do? Build a community of learners. So some of the things I haven't gathered enough evidence for yet. That's okay, because creating that sense of belonging, that togetherness, and that we build things out together, that wasn't a waste of time. There are certain competencies that bubbled up in there too that were evidence of. But I'm definitely taking my time before that reporting period. I used to feel really rushed, like the start of the year. I gotta start right away. I gotta do all the things. Now it's like, no, I've got time to gather this evidence, especially if my students are a part of that process. I don't know if that answered the question. I think there's a virtual hand, a digital hand.
Yeah. So, okay, so maybe it's because I don't know. So in BC, you're on the BC curriculum, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So do all teachers, like if you opened your grade book, do all teachers just report on the competencies? Is that how it works? Like you just fill in, so basically this is all evidence towards a competency, and then you just fill in, you put in a comment or a grade or whatever for that competency. And is that true for like all teachers across subject areas?
Yeah. So this is a great question. So there are certain components to our curriculum that we're gathering evidence towards, and I want to break those down. One, there are core competencies, which for my class, those are those 7 things on the wall. In BC, there are fewer than 7, but I've expanded on those. So that's one. In BC, we've been guided and advised to have the evidence of those be student generated, us supporting, us structuring, but I don't give those a mark, but we're gathering evidence of those. So that's when I sit down in that report card conference and I ask them questions about their competency growth and I capture that. So core competencies are 1. 2, each class has curricular competencies. So there are certain skills that are like English teacher E and science teacher E and math E, right? And so those I'm giving feedback on. And in the high school setting, those can be assessed across that proficiency scale and they can receive a mark over time. 3, we have content standards. So this is the what of the learning. The previous 2 was the how of the learning. Now it's the what of the learning. These are certain like understand or knowing standards. You've got to know these things leaving English 12. You've got to know these things leaving Science 9. And then 4, we have what we call big ideas. And each course has 5 or 6 big ideas, big statements of concept. And this is like the overarching understanding of the course. Whereas the content standards are the knowing, the big ideas, it's the overarching. So we have a lot to unpack there, don't we? From core competencies, those on my wall, student-generated reflection, evidence to bring in, to report out on, to confirm and affirm. Curricular competencies, content standards, and big ideas. Does that shed some more light to that question? Because it's a big one.
This one again? Core competencies, big ideas.
So yeah, great. So core competencies, then we go to curricular competencies. So core competencies are skills all students are flexing in all settings. Curricular competencies are English competencies or science competencies or social competencies, right? So in the English setting, like there are some writing specific skills, right? So core competencies, curricular competencies, content standards. So they have to know certain things in each course, and then big ideas.
Can you example? Okay, so let's say I came to class every day, but I didn't do the summative assignment that you had planned. based on like my participation as a student with all of the learning wall, evidence of learning, creating the rubrics, would you like feel comfortable assessing that student irrespective of doing their summative assignment? Like, could you say, okay,
Yeah.
well, I have enough evidence here that you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Erica, I'm so glad you're recording this because we're going to tweet the hell out of this afterwards. No, I'm joking. This is such a good question. You know, I'm only comfortable showing, you know, emerging, developing, proficient, extending if we have great evidence of the formative. Really, the formative should be so rich and clear that the summative becomes maybe unnecessary. So when you ask, do I feel comfortable a student not doing the summative? Only if I've seen enough evidence in the formative. And that's why Learning Wall is so beautiful, is it could be that space where they've demonstrated evidence of these curricular competencies or these content standards already. So this is, again, emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. Maybe the student who wants to do the summative wants to get into that extending area, but they've already demonstrated emerging or developing or even proficient. So your question really is founded on how strong is your formative assessment? How strong is your evidencing? How strong is your scaffolding towards that summative? My short answer is, yeah, I'm totally comfortable not doing the summative, only if I have all that richness throughout the process. Now, let's back out a bit. I said something earlier where in some schools I visit, assessment and learning is transactionary. It's here's my task, I assign it, kids do it, and they turn it in. Like, how are kids supposed to demonstrate rich formative growth towards the summative to make the summative something that we perhaps becomes obsolete? It's almost impossible in a learning environment where it's transactionary like that. But if we're co-designing and collaborative and evidencing and empowering our students, then we can scratch at that question big time in really powerful ways. How does that feel on your side?
good, but we did have another question
Yeah.
here, so I'll just pass the like.
So you said there's certain things that students must know, your third finger. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what word.
Yeah,
you
that
used.
was the content standards,
Please give
content
us
standards.
Could you give a specific example of what a content standard is in
Yeah.
your grade 12 English class? And how you would assess that?
Yeah.
In your grade.
So let's look at it right now.
I can get it up for you, Trevor, if you want to just start talking to it.
Too late. I beat you to it. So this is the curriculum. Up here on the yellow boxes, we've got these big ideas, right? Then on the left, we've got the curricular competencies. And then on the right, we've got the content standards, right? So right now, given the example I just shared you, given the example I just gave you, you tell me what has happened so far in my class.
Well, I'm asking you to tell me.
Okay, way to play along. Okay, well, students are demonstrating reading strategies. Not only are they reading a novel, but I'm asking them to submit chapter questions for discussion questions that we're actually discussing in small groups. And then, of course, the metacognitive strategies are the ones that they're learning through the competency standards as well, as I'm calling on them to reflect and revise and consider their learning as they go. And then we're gathering evidence. This is the time it's taking in British Columbia. We're gathering evidence towards emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. So that's what I need to report out on for each of these standards. Where is it across that proficiency scale? So the learning that I'm creating has to hit some content standards. And then when we look over at the curricular competencies, these are the things that I need to gather evidence towards. Are students reading for enjoyment? So it's not just merely a task is going to do these things. It's the experiences that I'm designing that are going to do these things. So that's a shift going from a task transactionary model of learning towards I need to present and create experiences where the competencies on the left are going to bubble up. And then across time, I could, and we can pick different ones. Like we're looking at one page here, right? Here's a second page and then a third page. etc. So in any given assessment intent, I beg your pardon?
What would your reporting look like on this?
So
What
my
an
reporting
example
looks
would
like
be?
a series of, well, my grade book looks different than what I report out on come report card time, right? Report card looks like I have to give a percentage. And then the commentary, the paragraphs I write are talking about strengths, what's an area of stretch, and what are strategies we need to utilize to work towards that stretch. And that's language the ministry is saying I have to use in my report card comments. So the ministry is saying, I don't have to talk about content. I don't have to talk about curricular competencies in the comments. I need to identify what are students' strengths here with regards to curricular competencies. I could pick one. What's a stretch? What's a goal? What's the ongoing learning? And what's a strategy or a few strategies that they could utilize to help them work towards that goal? So this is
okay.
such a great conversation. We're kind of fishing in an ocean that is like really far away from us right now, given your current context with regards to where you are in adopting the BC curriculum, right? And so shedding some light, gosh, I certainly don't want to frighten people away from these conversations. I want to clarify, but goodness, like we need to take some steps in our assessment kind of approach and our shift towards planning for learning where these things are going to bubble up. Here, I'll stop sharing my
Okay,
screen.
I got another comment that maybe you can share some of your reporting and your gradebook for the next session. That would be great.
Share my gradebook and okay. Erica, you got that note? You're muted.
Yeah, I took a picture of the chat request for you.
Cool. Cool. That was a great way to end.
I have a question just while Trevor's still here. I know you have to go, Trevor, but let's talk a little bit about co-creating that next session. I hear maybe some interest in a more kind of targeted conversation about the BC curriculum and how this kind of learning kind of builds to that. Is that maybe you could put your digital hands up or indicate if that's something that you'd be interested in? Can you use some space for that?
Erica is a 35-year-old teaching veteran here. I've heard that for years about young teachers, especially. Their questions about how do I get a mark from that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I give a mark, especially in middle school and high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the process of learning how to do that and tie that stuff all together as well. But it will come.
Mm-hmm.
Practice, practice, and practice.
I guess you can also feed that back to me, Trevor. I guess we'll let you go because I know you probably are scheduled back to back here. But
I am pretty tight, but I know I appreciate going over time with that question. Like, obviously, it's an important question people want to unpack. And Erica, as I do go, why don't you continue this chat about co-designing the next session, starting with a show and share with regards to co-designing success criteria and learning walls, and then how do we want to spend the other bit of time? That would be great.
Yeah, I'll just keep it
Cool.
minutes.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you,
Trevor.
friends. Thank you, Erica. I'll text you later on today so we can talk. Thank you for everyone sharing questions and commitment to this work. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, so actually before you just go, same as we did another time, you can drop them in the chat if you want. Our next session is April 17th. And we have two more kind of scheduled ones left, April 17th and May 17th. So if we want to think about kind of co-designing a little bit about where the interest is in the room, like this would be a really good time to just drop in the chat kind of things that you're thinking of that you, because myself and Trevor often meet before to sort of build out what we think, where we think we might be and things that kind of go sequentially. So if you give me the data, then I'll definitely have that discussion with him and then he can really make it relevant to the learners in the room. So I think we can engage with the assessment criteria sort of in how he plans his grade book. I'll just make a note of that and he's making a note of that also. We haven't talked a lot about assessment. So my plan was an assessment session. Would that be interesting for the people?
Yeah, and I'm actually the one who made that request of an example of a grade book. And I don't mean kind of like conceptual example. I mean like a snapshot. Like,
Yeah.
what does this look like?
I hope he's gonna share
Um,
on like a redacted version of his grade book. I would assume that's what I would suggest he does. Yep. Like real technical.
and even like the buildup, like the formative side of it and the summative side of it, so that it's kind of, we're seeing the record of those formative assessments building up to the summatives, kind of like, and outcomes. Basically, like what happens when you have a student who's done, 4 different formatives, but they haven't completed the summative. They've spent all that time carving that log, but they haven't done the essay. Right? So it would be really interesting to see kind of like what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, breakdown of the BC curriculum. For sure. And I think that there may be actually an example of a lesson plan like that in the T drive also. So you may just want to kind of look for that as well. It's perfect. Yep, but I'll ask him to sort of just go through that process too, like looking at kind of how he designed what he's doing right now from that BC curriculum menu. So like what he just showed us, to be able to like track that down and say, this is where I began, this is the learning opportunities I created as a result of that. And then this is what my assessment intent and how that's going to look from beginning of semester to end of semester. Corey, did you want to say something? Anyone else have anything?
I was just agreeing with the use for like applying the BC curriculum and assessment stuff with that.
Mm-hmm.
I have some of the things that I had and I messaged you about also, they worked into this one, so that was helpful.
Yeah, I didn't respond to you because I knew that they were coming in this one.
Yeah, it was coming into this one. Yeah. So that was good.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Anyone else have anything else that they would like to really kind of see in our last 2 sessions? The work on the inquiry cycles is in play. We weren't able to get it finished this time, but I'll be able to show a snapshot of sort of the differences between sort of the conventional and inquiry cycle and one that is a little bit more place-based. So that work will also feature or factor in here. So it sounds like our next one will feature largely on the BC curriculum, on planning to the BC curriculum and looking at Trevor's grade book. And then looking at the action items of kind of continuing with your learning wall evidencing, how you're using it, and then also co-creating criteria with students. And if you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out. Like Trevor is also available to you. You can message him. He's in our email list. You can message him through me. Those are all options. And I really appreciate all of your engagement and sending in your evidencing and your show and shares. And thank you very much for that. And that's kind of all I have left for us. So you can have these last couple minutes, reflect on today's session. I'll put the recording up because I know there are some people who missed it, and it will be accessible to us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week, Erica.
Yeah, you too.